It's outrageous. It's arrogant. It's excessive. It's larger than life. It's relentless. Flash Viking.
Welcome to this special episode of Relentless Flashbacking. This is your misogynistic host, Joey Cruel, and tonight I'll talk about Masters of the Universe with a very special guest, Scott Knightlick. First of all, I want to clarify that we are gonna talk about first world problems. I'm gonna say that some problems about pieces of plastic are even comparable to the large amount of manure out there. There are so many injustices, so many real issues, that you gotta have a different perspective on these action figure mistakes. If you compare these problems to the real problems, they will disappear. However, tonight we will talk mainly about a special toy line called Masters of the Universe Classics, so I have to talk about its mistakes and problems. But let's not forget that this isn't a trial, it's an interview, so I will not list every problem. I want to talk also about something else, so I chose just two issues to represent them all. One is about debatable choices, and one is about technical issues. Now let's start. Scott, can you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's absolute privilege and pleasure to join you. I love getting to talk toys. It's my favorite thing to do. So I'm Scott Toy Guru Knightlick. I've been a professional toy maker, toy designer, toy marketer for almost 25 years now. I've worked for some big toy companies like Mattel and Jax, some small toy companies like Jada. I worked for Entertainment Earth for a little while. And I moved out of California 2 years ago and now live in beautiful Greensboro, North Carolina, which if anyone's looking for an amazing community, it's got 300,000 people, 5 comic book shops, a dinosaur museum, and a water park. I like those odds.
Now I need to introduce a character that will start, let's say, the unpleasant section of this interview. This line had exclusive figures for the subscribers. Usually they were He-Man variants, a choice that was welcomed since they aren't essential. Your collection without them would be still complete. Then in 2012 there was the Shadow Weaver affair. Shadow Weaver is a key character that never had an action figure, and he was in everybody's wishlist, so a part of the fandom felt that this choice was a sort of blackmail. It was a lesson learned, and a key figure was never proposed again as an exclusive. In 2013, a mysterious new character was announced as the new exclusive, the Unnamed One. It was described as a love letter to fans of Masters of the Universe Classics. The Unnamed One was one of the many Masters of the Universe mysteries. When King Is, in one of the last mini-comic, talked about him, but we never saw the Unnamed One. This figure was kept as a secret until it was shipped. And there was a lot of speculation on how this brand new Snake Man would look like. I don't know, maybe a menacing two-headed figure. At the end, we discovered that the Unnamed One was just an evil Trollan, an evil Orko. So much promises and so little delivery. Orko was a character introduced by Filmation and was never accepted by a part of the fandom. In the classics canon, it was even transformed in a sort of secret agent with huge powers. But this new canon never upset anybody, because it doesn't change your collection. But this little guy, as the Snake Man leader, caused a lot of fuss, especially when compared to the highly successful Horde Prime and Light Hope, that were characters that were never showed in the vintage line. I know that in other major properties there are powerful little characters, but the Masters of the Universe toy line was all about huge jacket men and powerful women, so it was a letdown for a part of the fandom. They were also upset that this character was called a love letter to the Masters of the Universe fans. I personally loved the Snake Blast, but I was among the ones who were disappointed. But what are you gonna do? If you don't like it, just sell it and shut up. Well, let's say that there is another problem bounded to this figure, and I will talk about in the next question. Now, what I like to know is who created the character, who described it as a love letter to the Masters of the Universe fans, and after all this hype, how do you react to such a negative reaction?
Hey, perfectly legitimate question about the subscription-only figures. So yeah, let me see if I can give a little background. I think it's important to realize just how tiny the Masters of the Universe Classics toy line was, especially in terms of Mattel as a company as a whole. As an example, a brand manager, which is what my role was, oversees a certain amount of business. And just to use, for a round number, let's just say it's $100 million worth of business. Matty Collector is even close to this. And again, I'm just using numbers as placeholders to illustrate my point because I don't want to give away Mattel proprietary information. I had an assigned job at Mattel, which was working on DC Universe Classics and then eventually the Hot Wheels Star Wars line, Green Lantern movie, that kind of thing. That was my official job as a brand manager. What I was doing for Classics was really a passion project that I'm fortunate Mattel allowed me to do in my spare time, essentially nights and weekends, as long as I could get it done and we didn't have extra stock. So to say the line had very few resources is an understatement. So when we had things like Shadow Weaver and we put her out there as a sort of a subscription, bait to get people to subscribe, it's because we had to have subscribers because without them we wouldn't have been able to do the line. So doing characters that, yes, were fan demanded as sub-only figures was really because we needed every possible marketing tool we had to sell this line in. And it was completely dependent on fans supporting it online, much the way a retail line is dependent on a retailer supporting a line in the same way that they will see one wave and they'll place an order for all year. So likewise, we would show one wave to subscribers and ask them to subscribe for the full year. So that's kind of part of it, is just really having very few tools in our toolbox to sell this line in. As far as the unnamed one, I think part of it is anytime you do a figure that reveals a mystery, that, the mystery is going to be sometimes disappointing, like when we found out Wolverine's origin or what Boba Fett looked like under the helmet. We sometimes build these things up in our mind for years, if not decades, and there's no way to please everyone. It was never promised that the unnamed one was going to be a Snake Man or, some giant monster. And while, of course, there's going to be people who are disappointed with how he looked, there's also people who love how he looked. What can I say? It was, part of where the story was going, and I'm really proud of that figure. If 100%, if there are fans and subscribers who were disappointed with it, they have every right to be. But a lot of it really just comes from expectations that are just built up over a long time, and you're never going to please everyone all of the time. We really just kind of did the best we could with what we did have, which again wasn't much.
You'll find a link for the video made by Scott about this character in the description below. I consider the Masters of the Universe Classics a complete line. Maybe I'm missing a Detective Lubick figure, but it's just a detail. However, there is a part of fans that considers this line incomplete, and that's one of the two major issues I'm going to address tonight. The New Adventures of He-Man is a series that I despise, but I can understand that the fans of this line are the ones who are more upset than everybody else. There are 10 New Adventures figures missing, and the fans were even willing to go in against the rule to not use key characters as exclusives, because they were saying, we received debatable characters, but we don't have the New Adventures figures that we wanted. In fact, this line has at least 9 characters that weren't welcomed well by all the fandom. The Unnamed One, Psychop, Dare, King He-Man, Neptune, Sears Laser-Lot, and I discovered that even the Fighting Foeman that I just adore caused a lot of fuss. Do you consider the Classics line complete? Going back, would you do things in a different way?
So do I consider Classics complete? I mean, there were always, figures that, that we wanted to get to. And I mean, 2016 was planned out as a full year, and there were plans for 2017 and 2018 on paper. So there could have always been more figures. Really, one of the only things I wish we did was started Princess of Power sooner. We were kind of slow to crank out those characters, and maybe some more in year 1 and 2 would have been nice. As far as New Adventures, they absolutely sold the poorest, I will tell you. I mean, the New Adventures figures sold, I think Slushhead came out the same day as Mighty Spectre, and Mighty Spectre way outsold Slushhead. So, like some of the examples you give, specifically citing, Cyclop and King He-Man, Sir Laser-Lot, these were characters like Sir Laser-Lot and Psychop were both figures that were part of a 30th anniversary program of brand new characters that fans had never seen before. So doing a New Adventures figure in one of those slots would have never worked. Like, that slot was not available for a New Adventures figure. Those were slots that were used for part of the 30th anniversary line, which was made up of never-before-seen characters. And then, again, Hero 2, King He-Man, a Name One, these were subscription-only figures, again, used as, if you will, kind of bait to get people to buy into a full-year sub. And putting a character like KO or, one of those characters up as a subscription-only figure would not have really moved subscriptions, because the New Adventures figures just didn't sell. They really didn't. They were the lowest selling faction by far of anything. So all of the figures you kind of list, more or less, are... You can't just, the slots are not interchangeable. You can't just plop a New Adventures figure into a 30th anniversary line or a Comic-Con exclusive, or something like that. So it really isn't a question of, could we have substituted those figures? Really, no, because those figures didn't qualify for a New Adventures figure to fill that slot because of the particular nature of those slots. So do I wish we could finish New Adventures? Absolutely. Is there a reason we didn't? Absolutely. They didn't sell. We would have probably, I'm sure we would have done more of them had they sold better. We could have given them their own, kind of mini sub like we did for Filmation and Princess of Power. But at the end of the day, we needed to make toys that were going to sell. And, there's the argument that, well, everyone was in with the subscription, but I'm talking about the day of sales, above and beyond the subscription. How many units we could move beyond that. So that's, how you gauge it. So there were figures that sold a ton beyond the subscription, and then New Adventures figures where you might just sell a couple. So that was really, there was a big difference there.
If you don't believe to Scott, have you ever tried to sell figures like Hydron or Icarius from the New Adventures? Then there is another type of problem, technical issues. There were a lot of issues, and collectors learned to live with most of them. But let's not forget that this world isn't perfect. Every toy line had mistakes. Takes the vintage line, for example. I'm still wondering who was the genius who said, "I got an idea, what if we put rubber bands to connect the legs so the figures will be wobbling after a while?" Does this can work here? But there is a current menace to the collection, the so-called black plastic Morbo. There is a batch of figures that were casted in black plastic and then painted all over to save some money. If this choice can be dangerous to a statue, imagine what can happen to a classics action figure that got so many points of articulation. Some fans even posted photos of damaged figures still in the box. This was another choice that led many fans to not subscribe anymore and to leave the line. So how in the world this wrong idea was even approved?
The black plastic concept. So that was actually something I was not even aware of. It was something that engineering did without running it by myself or anyone else in design, because essentially they were tasked with bringing the cost down on these figures. And one way they came up with to do that was to have the vendors do the molding for multiple figures all at the same time. And the best way to do that was to have them all be in one color, and I guess black is the easiest color to paint over, which is why it was used. I can tell you if this idea was brought to me as a suggestion, I would have absolutely passed, but it wasn't. It wasn't something I found out about till after it was done. And it was literally a cost-saving maneuver that the engineering group tried because they were given the marching orders by upper management to bring down the cost, and this was something they came up with, and they tried it, So that's where it came from, and once we found out about it, once I found out about it, I stopped it. But again, this is all part of the fact that Classics was run so below the radar, and it was so a passion project, not a mainline thing. So there really weren't, it wasn't a media driver or a stock driver for the company, if you will. Everyone was proud of it, and I'm not saying Mattel corporate didn't support it, but it wasn't a brand that was going to get a huge amount of resources. So, if engineering was told lower the cost and they came up with a way to do that, that's kind of how it worked with such a small brand like that. And that's why it happened.
So another thing that led many fans to not collect anymore was the subscription model. But as you said before, there is no way around it, because in an established sales system, retailers commit to a full year, so customers had to take the role of retailers. So if you can read between the lines, you can see that behind all these problems, there is a common root. As you said, the line was a passion project. not a mainline thing. It wasn't a brand with huge resources, because Mattel didn't see a future for this line, and in fact, they never tried to sell this line to children. And we know that the collector's lines are just a niche market. The real earnings are in the children's section, so it's a real miracle what the line achieved thanks to Scott's efforts. Am I wrong? Or is it true that the major problem of this line was, let's say, the lack of support from Mattel?
I wouldn't at all say it was due to a lack of support from Mattel and from management, because obviously they did support it. And, even just allowing me to work on the brand in addition to kind of my day job of working on DC or Green Lantern movie or Hot Wheels Star Wars was support. It really came down to how much, resource or revenue the brand brought in. And because it brought in such a tiny amount of revenue, especially compared to things like Batman or WWE or Hot Wheels or Fisher-Price or Barbie, which drive the company, this line was such a tiny drop in the bucket. The thing is, we are also emotionally attached to the brand and the line because we love it so much, which is great. But from a corporate standpoint, when you have a publicly traded company with, stockholders that have to be pleased, a line that takes as much resources as, say a retail Batman line, but brings in so little revenue, of course it's not going to be, get a lot of media dollars and a lot of attention. It got support. It just didn't get media dollars, because it was just so tiny. I mean, really, I think a lot of fans, just even adult collectors in general, don't realize how small the adult collector buyers are. If you look at the toy industry as a whole, every category, from kids product to dolls to vehicles, action figures is one of the smallest categories. Games, all of these. So already you've got a tiny category within the overall toy industry. And as an example, versus like toddler toys is a huge part of the toy industry. It's probably 60%, 70%. So you've already got a small category, action figures, and now within that you have adult collector action figures, which makes it even tinier. So I think that really is a perspective that is missed, is that we're so emotional and we love these so much. We wait patiently for that new white box to show up in our mailbox or on our doorstep, that the emotional thrill of the line overrides the business sense that isn't a line that makes a lot of money for the company. So is it worth a full-time position of somebody running it? And for a company like Mattel, no, it isn't, because as I said earlier in this interview, Mattel brand managers are expected to manage, X amount of dollars of product. And I think I just threw out like 100 million as a reference number, not an actual number. So again, just for made-up hypothetical numbers, if a brand manager is required to oversee $100 million in revenue and Matty Collector is bringing in $500,000, think of that as a comparison. So if you are running this company and you have to please the stockholders, what brands are you going to put your resources into? Brands that bring in $100 million or brands that bring in $500,000? You have to think of it that way. While we love it emotionally, it's hard to get resources for such a tiny, tiny brand like that. They did support it. It just, you have to look at it within the context of the overall company and the overall toy industry.
Since my favorite brands are Hot Wheels and Masters of the Universe, I always saw Mattel as a great toy brand. But maybe I should reconsider that. Maybe it's time for an ontological shift. Let me explain. In the 70s, they rejected the idea of making Star Wars toys. Fail! Then they created Intellivision, but they didn't know how to survive the 1983 video game crash, and it was folded. Fail! In the 80s, they mismanaged the Masters of the Universe line, and it was folded too. Fail! Then they tried to reach success with Bravestar, but the figures were too expensive and it failed. Fail! Then they tried with Captain Power, but instead to develop an animated series, they approved an expensive live-action TV series, too mature for children and too childish for grown-ups, and it failed. Fail! Then they tried to rebrand He-Man, launching him in space, and it failed. Fail! Then they totally forgot to produce skateboards inspired by the overboard scene in the Back to the Future 2. Heck, there is even a Mattel logo on it. This is just a no-brainer. Fail. Then they tried again to launch Masters of the Universe in 2002, but with various wrong moves, and it failed. Fail. Then, as I said before, they never tried to expand the Masters of the Universe Classics line to the children market, and practically there wasn't advertising for the Classics line. In fact, many people discovered the Classics line when it was too late. And guess what happened? First they sold the rights to Super 7, and then they closed the line. Fail. Now, even if the action figures market is just a drop in the bucket, they launched 3 action figures toy lines about Masters of the Universe that will compete one against each other. There is the Origins line that seems to be aimed at children and collectors. Then there is the toy line inspired by the animated series for children. So over design that's like adding more CGI to an empty screenplay. And then there is the collector's line that is just a bleak and uninspired answer to the Classics line, when they could just reissue the characters from the Classics line instead of wasting money on new molds.
A disaster waiting to happen.
Maybe somebody is saying, hey, wait a minute, the new Kevin Smith animated series doesn't look like the Classics line. Well, the vintage line wasn't a perfect replica of the animated series, because it was the animated series that had to follow the toy line, and not vice versa. Then, it's Mattel that should have the last word, and not Kevin Smith. Mattel should have said to Kevin Smith, son, now sit down, because you will not like what I'm going to say. Take your updated design and show it up your You will follow the Classics line whether you like it or not. And now get off my lawn. For sure, Mattel survived thanks to Barbie, Fisher-Price and Hot Wheels, but it's surprising that they didn't screw up even these successful lines. Maybe it's time for an anthological shift, because I can't follow the logic of their choices, and their way of management seems pretty shambolic. What do you think? Am I wrong?
Well, I think if you look at any Mattel press release, it's clear, pretty universally, every single press release they send out, Mattel always talks about its core brands, Barbie, Hot Wheels, and Fisher-Price, because these brands make up by far the bulk of revenue for Mattel. And honestly, anything else we get out of Mattel, even action figures and games, is kind of in a way a blessing, because the company is publicly owned. They need to make money for their stockholders. So they're going to focus on categories that make, the biggest return, the biggest bang for their buck. And, I've done a video on my Spectra Creative channel on YouTube about why large companies are really not set up to do these small toy lines for collectors. It's great that Super 7 took over Classics because they're a small toy company and they can focus on something like that. They're more apt, and the structure of their company is better fitted to do something like that. So it's not as much, a legacy of failure. It's more that, Mattel tries to diversify its portfolio into different categories, but it does not hide behind the fact that Barbie, Hot Wheels, and Fisher-Price by far are the biggest money makers and are what drive the company. And that absolutely, since they make the money, that's where Mattel focuses. And if you ran the company, that's probably, you were being held to financial objectives for the stockholders. I can bet, you or anyone out there listening would do the same thing. I mean, of course, we want to make He-Man toys because we love them, but outside of, finding a crazy brand manager who's willing to do it as a passion project, it's a little hard to justify giving resources to a brand that just does not bring in the revenue. It's all about revenue. I mean, it's a Fortune 500 company. No matter what the industry, whether you're making, toilet paper, paper towels, books, dried fruits, sweaters, or toys, you're going to need to make product that sells. And Barbie, Fisher-Price, and Hot Wheels sell. So that's why Mattel prioritizes them. It makes business sense.
Sometimes fans just lose control, and they forgot that they are just talking about useless pieces of plastic. And they even attacked you personally. How do you survive?
How do I survive when fans attack me personally? Honestly, at the end of the day, you just kind of think about you're doing it for the toys and to complete the collection and to make people happy, and you're never going to make everyone happy all the time. I receive death threats all over the line, and Mattel Security takes those very seriously, believe me. I've sat in many meetings because of that. You just kind of have to shrug it off. But I do think the fact that I, was kind of the public face of the brand, purposefully or inadvertently, just kind of worked out that way. That's actually a big reason why no one took over the brand after I left, is because no one else wanted to stick their head out, because people chopped my head off so much. It's kind of like, why would someone else want to take that risk when it's shown this is the way the fans react? So for me, it's like, as a collector myself, I understand, because anytime a figure that I'm buying in any line comes out wrong, I get upset. So I understand. I can make that emotional connection, and I just had to try to look the other way, I guess.
What I can say, they got a pretty sad attitude. I wanna thank Scott for his time, and with this last answer, the first part of this interview ends. Please subscribe to Relentless Flashbacking so you will not miss the second part, and follow the show on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. Relentless Flashbacking is easy to find, because the name is unique all over the web. If you want to give your support, please visit Patreon. And you can support this channel also buying these totally awesome t-shirts. See you with the next episode. Over and out.